There are plenty of video game fates out there that are miserable in their own ways, but today we're looking for something special, the most unbelievably terrifying, disgustingly gory, and utterly off-putting fates. Not only do these fates promise an absolutely terrible emotional outlook, but furthermore a truly hopeless physical one, because really, how good can life get when you're something like a giant human fly? I'm Amy from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video game body horror fates worse than death. 10. Fallout 3 or New Vegas, becoming a centaur. The centaurs are mutated creatures who are created by shoving a whole bunch of different animals along with some humans into vats of forced evolutionary virus, and then, just letting them stew for a while. What emerges is a beast so twisted that Mother Nature herself would cry just looking at it. There are several variants of the centaur, but their shared features boil down to this. They're fleshy-looking, four-legged, tumorous, chunky monsters. When not dealt with properly, these guys can be lethal, explaining why they're often used for protection. So, as if it wasn't enough that, as a human chucked into a vat of FEV, you had to go through the pain of being mutated by a powerful virus and come out as a hideous monster with various animal parts now constituting your horrible body, you could end up living the rest of your life in servitude as someone's guard dog or personal transport. Life just ain't fair. 9. SKULLGIRLS. Involuntary body mods. SKULLGIRLS serves up body horror like it's going out of style, but one particularly terrible in-game affliction was put upon Painwheel. Prior to her transformation, Painwheel was a normal school kid with a normal name, Carol. Unfortunately for her, though, a normal life was not on the cards and she was kidnapped and made subject to experiments. She received a blood transfusion from a monstrous entity, a parasite which causes sharp spikes to protrude through her skin, and a cord with helicopter-like blades at the end was attached to her spine. Some would call it an upgrade, others would call it a living nightmare. With artificially infused bulging muscles and blades painfully bursting through her skin, she sort of channels the Wolverine vibe, but just with more inner turmoil. I mean, even her parents shun her after seeing her new monstrous appearance. She really did get a raw deal compared to other characters in the game. Some only have their mouths sewn shut or require a bit of blood to maintain youth, but poor Painwheel got stuck with 3 whole gross body mods. 8. The Evil Within, stuck in STEM. A terrible fate befalls those who die connected to STEM, a system that allows for minds to be connected and explored. Those who die whilst connected to the machine or otherwise become overpowered by it have their consciousness remain inside. The consciousness is not whole and alive, however. Ruvik, STEM's creator, describes it as clay that's shapeable to his desires, so in layman's terms, a violent husk of its former self. It's not just that being stuck controlled by Ruvik forever sucks, but that they have to look so awful whilst doing it. The haunted resemble the classic zombie interpretation we see across a lot of media. Their pale, corpse-like bodies are gravely injured and rotting, with pieces of glass and metal and barbed wire lodged in their skin. Certain DLCs feature another variant of the haunted. In some ways, they're more intact than their main game counterparts, but they have the addition of glowing boils and pustules covering their corpses. Whilst the colours of the sores function a bit like a warning light for the player, they definitely aren't as helpful for the deceased, serving only to make them even more disgusting than before. 7. SOMA, mutated by structure gel. The words body horror and SOMA just go together so well. But for the sake of picking just one example from a list of many terrible body horror fates, we're going to settle on Terry Akers, a formerly pleasant middle-aged man with a penchant for chess working on Pathos 2. After ingesting a hell of a lot of structure gel, Akers began to resemble all the nameless proxies in a lot of ways. His body's discoloured and covered in growths and tumours, his face sunken into itself with no features left distinguishable, although the missing eyes have a whole story of their own. His upper body is bloated and misshapen, and medical room scans reveal that his skeleton has followed suit. Imagine being an honest working man all your life, just nearing retirement age when things suddenly start going south for you. You were just going to retire to the south of France, but now your skeleton has started playing Twister with itself, your skin is erupting in bubbling boils, and you're so sensitive to light that you end up listening to the voice in your head telling you to get rid of your own eyes. Grim. 6. Amnesia the Dark Descent, serving Alexander. Whilst these enemies' appearances don't necessarily stand up as the most terrifying next to some of the more recent offerings in the horror world, they're definitely worth a mention. Now working under Alexander's command, these mangled monsters were once human. From notes and flashbacks in-game, it can be deduced that they were soldiers in the 30 Years' War. They wandered into the woods and came across Castle Brennenburg, where they ingested the poisoned wine, and the rest is history. Or alternatively, they may have been regular servants at the castle who suffered the same fate. Either way, once Alexander's done with them, they are no longer human. Their skin is leathery and covered in scars, held together by fabric ties and stitches. Gatherers have bulging eyeballs and gaping, jawless maws, whilst brutes seem to be devoid of all facial features aside from a huge central mouth. If there's one good side to all of this, at least we know for some reason that they smell really good. A loading screen describes their scent as being of spiced wine, clove and sage, so kind of like mulled wine and Christmas. Guess you gotta hold on to the little things, don't you? 5. Dead Space, becoming a necromorph. The necromorphs are very well-known beasts by now. The main antagonists of the Dead Space franchise, these big old baddies have been making people uneasy since their first appearance in 2008. It's hard to think that anybody would see these guys and come to the conclusion that they're the next stage of evolution, especially given that they're literal dead bodies, and that really isn't how evolution works. Despite this, though, these mutated corpses are said by some to be the markers of humanity's ascension. Spikes, twisted limbs and all. I mean, God, no wonder Nicole opted out. There are a few different kinds of necromorph encountered throughout the Dead Space franchise, but regardless of subspecies, the necromorphs all have certain features in common, including their mutilated corpse-like appearance. Some of the ugliest looking necromorphs are the slashers, a common type formed of one simple human body. Out of their arms or shoulder blades, sharp pieces of bone protrude to function like scythes, and their feet are flayed and splayed to the point that they look more like chicken feet than human. It's really quite hard to believe that they were ever people. 4. Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles, living the fly life. Chimera's deceptive name would lead you to think that there's no human fate involved. Well, you would be wrong, for the mix in question here is far from what the Greeks would have known. In fact, it's a lot closer to something you may have seen Jeff Goldblum portray in the 80s. Seeking to make the next hellish bioweapon, the Umbrella Corporation began experiments combining humans with all sorts of insects, the one of which proved to be the most effective being the fly. Made in part from a human embryo and incubated and birthed by a very unfortunate human, the chimera certainly is one ugly creation. With multiple hairy appendages and a gaping mouth hanging below empty, haunted eyes, these creations really could have been crafted by Satan himself. How unfortunate a fate to be that embryo, to be that one in a billion who, instead of being born into a normal life, you were mashed up with fly DNA and sent out into the world buzzing and screaming. 3. Bloodborne, The Old Hunters DLC, cursed like Ludwig. Poor Ludwig was, a long time ago, a hunter and a respected leader, but after being overcome by bloodlust, he transformed into a beast. Like a centaur gone wrong, his torso arises from his skinless body in an impossibly large hunch. 4 muscular legs tipped with hooves and a number of apparently useless extra limbs project from his lower half. His face is somewhere at the cross-section of horse, wolf and man, with large but not sharp teeth and crazy human eyes. Down his spine you can see the angular corners of bone, and most, if not all, of his body appears to be skinless and flayed. He has hair, but it definitely isn't looking its best, with its dishevelled style adding to the overall insanity of his look. His semi-human face, matched with a completely monstrous body, put his appearance somewhere in the uncanny valley, making him genuinely uncomfortable to look at in the eye. To put it simply, you wouldn't want to encounter him on a dark night, or any other time really. 2. The Secret World, becoming a fish incubator. Think The Shape of Water meets The Walking Dead and you'll be somewhere on the right track to picturing the Draug, one of the enemies from The Secret World. The first of the Draug were born as humans, living in villages and working and warring at sea until they were called to the water, only to have it spit them back out many years later once their monstrous conversion was complete. They're zombie-like creatures inhabiting the deep ocean and venturing out to conquer nearby lands, therefore expanding their population. If you're killed by a Draug, you can't expect a peaceful death and burial, as once you're dead, you're resurrected as a zombie and implanted with eggs. Yeah, you heard that right. As the eggs grow, the corpse swells and bloats until it's time to hatch, at which point a suitable place to lie down is found and the corpse turns into a big egg hotbox before cracking open to release a whole new Draug. As if regular pregnancy wasn't gory enough, this adds a whole new dimension to it. Yeah, it's gonna be a hard pass from me. 1. The Suffering. Living your death personified. After being convicted of murdering his wife and kids, protagonist Torque is condemned to be imprisoned at Carnate Island. Far from a holiday destination, this island is haunted by the years of violence that have occurred on its soils, and now seeks to draw the very worst out of all of its inhabitants. The game's enemies represent different methods of death or execution. Existing as one of these enemies would subject one to varying levels of discomfort, but one of the most awful ones has to be a Fester. These enemies are huge, inflated-looking humanoids. Their huge mass and water-dwelling nature suggest they're waterlogged and rotting, but the worst part is what's wriggling around inside them beside their long-dead organs. Being the reincarnations of slave traders that left slaves to die on the island, they must suffer the same pain for eternity, being eaten inside out by rats. In death, the rats release themselves from the body, prompting the player to think about what it must have been like to have all those little suckers running around gnawing your insides all day, because I'd wager that's probably one of the worst ways to live I've ever heard of. And you know what? You really can't say it's not deserved. And on that note, we've reached the end of this list of 10 video game body horror fates worse than death. If you've got any more that you would have put on this list, then let us know in the comments below. And remember to check out WhatCulture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. I've been Amy from WhatCulture, and I'll catch you next time.